Okay, now please welcome Hailey for Hailey's Math Theory of Social Awkwardness. Hailey's Math Theory of Social Awkwardness. Hailey.
I'm going to do slides the old school style today. Computers put them on the table. I remember the exact moment that I knew that I had a problem. Hey, Hailey, what's up? Good. Wait a second. That's not the right answer to that question. I have always been a little bit socially awkward. So I had to learn rules that a lot of people seem to take for granted, naturally. And while I wasn't good at being social, I was pretty good at math. So I decided to map being social into a math problem. Today I would like to share with you my views on being social and answer the question, why are some situations just a bit more awkward than others? So in math, a function maps an input to an output. You feed in X, you get out Y. Social situations work pretty much the same way. Someone says something, that is processed through whatever context that you are in, and you get a response. Now, this may not be as precise as a mathematical function usually is, but there is some degree of logic behind it. For example, if a coworker asks you, what did you do this weekend? You probably wouldn't respond, I like the color blue. Well, unless you're a surrealist, but we're not going to go there today. You'd normally answer something related to what you actually did that weekend. Now, a conversation can be thought of as a context function. I'm representing with a capital C. That somebody says something or asks a question, it's processed through the context function, and you get a response. The response depends on what was said and the context which you are in. For example, if someone asks you, how are you doing today? Your reply will likely be different if that person is a coworker versus your significant other. Now, conversations are typically not, hopefully, one-sided. In math, the domain of a function is all the valid inputs for that function, and the range of the function is all the allowed outputs given that domain. In conversation, any context that you're in has a set of socially acceptable things that you can talk about. If you're talking with a coworker, things like what you do this weekend or how's work going, etc. To really understand a conversation, you need to know both. You need to know the things that are socially acceptable to be talked about and the things that you can reply, given that context. You need to understand both. Social awkwardness happens when you either get the domain wrong, you talk about something that you shouldn't talk about in that context, or you get the response wrong. You process whatever someone else says through the wrong context. Social awkwardness also happens when you use things like silence or light touches or something in a context that you don't need them to be in. For example, dance, it's okay to touch someone. Coworkers, not so much. Now, an interesting insight happens when you actually plot awkwardness versus time with a single person. When you start out, you have a culture context. You have a shared culture, either society culture or work culture, that you have in common. And there's certain things you can talk about within that context. But there's only so many things that you can talk about with that context, and at some point you will run out. And awkwardness happens when you start to run out of things to say. Now, hopefully, with this person, you'll be able to find things you have in common. And at that point, you can switch context from this default context to an interest-based context, or possibly more than one interest-based context. So these common interests allow you to chat about these things. And for most people that you meet, it stops there. You have enough to talk about with your shared interests. But for some people, the curve is actually bimodal or possibly multimodal, which means it has more than one peak. What happens here is that you're actually starting to develop a context with the other person that is unique between the two of you. This is where like inside jokes come in. Now, creating this context can be a bit awkward because you are actually stepping outside of the context that you've previously been in. It's an experiment. You're trying to say things, seeing how the other person responds, trying silence, seeing how the other person responds. And it's a back and forth. And there can be moments where they don't respond all that well, and awkwardness can pursue. But at some point, you will just get comfortable with this person, and the awkwardness will decline. And if this is someone that you get really close to, you will find that the domain of things that you can talk about expands to almost anything. So next time that you are in a situation and you find yourself a little bit awkward, ask yourself why. Is it an incorrect response? Do you not understand the domain of the context that you're in? Are you in the process of co-creating a context with someone else and are at that awkward stage? For those of you who are natural at being social, I commend you. That's awesome. But please remember, there are people like me, and be patient with us because we are trying. Thank you.